A sharp knife struck against the wooden board. A slice of deep red meat fell, its blood smearing into a long line like a broken vow. Adrian Cole, the man who once built the Cole's grill chain with calloused hands, now stood silent in the cold brightness of the boardroom, his fingers trembling slightly over a stack of reports. The lifeless numbers slid past his eyes, profits declining, customers leaving, the brand fading. But what made his chest tighten was not the numbers. It was another fear. The fresh promise that once fed his dream was rotting away in someone else's hands. 15 years ago, Adrian had stood behind the counter, sweat soaking his shirt, grilling each burger himself. He made a vow to himself and to every stranger who walked in. Here, only fresh meat, no deceit, no shortcuts. That vow built his empire. Yet now, beneath the fluorescent glare of the boardroom, a cold voice from the operations director cut through. "We could save nearly $200,000 a year if we switched to frozen meat. Customers won't notice." The air froze. Adrian turned his head, staring straight at the man. His breath caught heavy, like molten steel. "Won't notice?" He ground out each word. "I notice. Customers will notice. And when they do, what we lose will not be a few dollars in profit. It will be the very heart of this brand." Some eyes dropped to the table, a few indifferent shrugs. In that moment, Adrian felt like a stranger inside the very empire he had built. He leaned back, looking down at the hands that had once been stained with dirt, grease, and sweat. Now they held nothing but veins and a cold pen. Then, unexpectedly, a worn, golden envelope was placed in front of him. The assistant's hand trembled as she whispered, "A letter from a longtime customer." Adrian opened it. The handwriting was old, unsteady, but each line cut deep like a blade. "The burgers aren't the same. The meal that was once my memory with my husband has disappeared. I will not return." Signed, Margaret Ellis. His heart pounded. He pictured the elderly woman walking away quietly from the restaurant that had once been her special place. And with her, hundreds, thousands of customers' memories were slipping away. He closed his eyes, a storm of anger mixed with regret rising within him. Years in the boardroom had made him forget the heat of the kitchen fire, the smell of morning coffee, the sound of the bell jingling when customers walked in. If he did not return himself, the truth would remain buried beneath polished false reports. Adrian opened his eyes, the decision etched into his gaze. He would return not as a founder, but as a nobody. No power, no reputation. Just a nameless customer in the corner of a restaurant, sipping a cold coffee, listening to what his employees said when the boss was not there. They thought he was old, retired, nothing more than a name on the sign. But soon they would know. The man they underestimated was the one holding the fate of them all. Adrian clenched the letter in his hand, whispering a new vow, not for shareholders, not for reports, but for Margaret, for the memories lost, and for the burning heart he once carried. "I will find the hands that broke this promise, and when the truth is revealed, there will be no place left to hide." A gray morning settled over the city, fine mist brushing across the glass windows of the high-rise. Inside the long meeting room, the polished wooden table was scattered with reports, pages flipping with sharp rustles. The air was heavy, the faint smell of stale coffee lingering in the sealed space like rusted metal. Adrian Cole sat among the row of chairs, not at the head of the table where he once belonged, but further back, quietly observing. He knew that when people thought no one was watching, they spoke more honestly. The voice of the chief financial officer rang out, steady and flat like a funeral notice. Revenue last quarter fell 8%. Customer returns increased 40% compared to last year. We may be forced to close at least 3 branches this year. The words struck Adrian's ears like hammer blows, sealing a coffin for the brand. His hand clenched tight, veins rising on his knuckles. Before anyone else could respond, the marketing director interjected, tapping a pen against the table in a staccato rhythm. Negative reviews are everywhere. The most common words are cold, not like it used to be. This is not simply complaint. This is a verdict. A long silence followed, heavy as a stone pressing down on the chest. Adrian felt every avoided glance, every weary sigh. Then the dry voice of the operations director cut through, pouring fuel on the fire. The simplest solution: switch to frozen meat. Costs go down, profits recover. Customers will not be able to tell the difference if the seasoning is strong enough. In that instant, the air froze. Adrian slowly turned his head toward him, his gaze sharp as a scalpel slicing through the hollow indifference. Not be able to tell the difference? Adrian said quietly, each word forced through his teeth. I can tell the difference. The customers who have eaten here since the beginning can tell the difference. They will feel it even if they cannot name it. What you are suggesting is cutting out our own heart and selling it cheap. The room fell silent. Even the fluorescent lights seemed to stop flickering. A few collars twitched nervously. The operations director shrugged. Profit is the blood that keeps a business alive. Memories do not pay the bills. Adrian pressed both palms against the table, his body leaning forward, his voice deep and unyielding, shattering the apathy filling the room. You are wrong. Fresh meat is not decoration. It is the soul. Cut it away, and you dig the grave for this brand. For a fleeting second, a few eyes lit up with surprise, with shame, maybe even fear. But then they dropped again, bowing to numbers. The CFO lifted his head, delivering the final blow. We understand your perspective, but we need a solution. Otherwise, mathematics will decide for us. Adrian sank back into his chair, his jaw locked tight. In that moment, he saw clearly the problem was not only cost, it was that these people had forgotten why it all began. His gaze swept across the table. Some eyes avoided his. Some looked tired, drained. No one dared to say the roots had rotted. No one dared to admit that pride had died inside the kitchen itself. He pushed the stack of reports away. His voice was low, but each word landed heavy on the floor. I will go find what is decaying. When I return, we will not be talking about cutting out the heart. We will make it beat again. He rose, leaving behind the bewildered stares. In his chest, a slow fire began to surge. For the first time in years, Adrian no longer felt like the CEO in a boardroom. He was once again the cook he used to be, ready to roll up his sleeves and tear open every shadowed corner to uncover the truth. The thin yellow envelope lay on the wooden table like a piece of forgotten evidence. When Adrian picked it up, his fingers felt the paper slightly damp, as if it had been pressed down for too long in a drawer. The handwriting slanted, trembling, yet pressed firmly into each stroke of blue ink. Mr. Cole, I don't know if you still remember me, but I remember. He read slowly, his eyes heavy. The letter told of the early days, a young couple visiting the newly opened restaurant, forced to share a single burger because they could not afford more. That day, Adrian himself had given them an extra slice of cake. Each sentence opened a sky of memory. The worn wooden table corner, the smell of freshly baked bread, the husband's radiant eyes when he said, "This is the best burger of my life." The handwriting weakened as it went on. Every anniversary we came back. After he passed away, I still went alone. But the last time the food was bland and cold. No one asked, no one cared. I fear the place that was once ours is now gone. I will not return again. Signed, Margaret Ellis. Adrian froze, as if a stone had been hurled into his heart. He imagined the elderly woman quietly leaving the restaurant, her hand trembling as she clutched the last memory of her life. Each line of the letter weighed down on his chest, pressing the air from his lungs. He folded the letter carefully, as though afraid it might tear. Yet inside, anger and regret twisted tight. For years he had buried himself in meetings and contracts, leaving the branches to drift into cold neglect. And now, a loyal customer, a witness to the promise of long ago, had turned her back. He walked to the window, staring out at the city shrouded in mist. In the pale light he saw his reflection merged with a thick steel frame, as if imprisoned in a cage he had built himself. His hands gripped the letter tightly. The promise was no longer his alone. It belonged to Margaret, to every customer who had believed in the name Cole's Grill. Adrian drew in a deep breath. A decision flared. There was no room left for delay. The truth would not come to the boardroom on its own. He had to go, to become someone else, to step into the restaurants that bore his name as a stranger. In his mind, the voice from long ago echoed with weight. If anyone breaks the promise of freshness, I will be the one to find it and cut it out at the root. His eyes burned with fire. This time, no one would know he was the owner, and no one would escape his gaze. The mirror in the small room reflected a stranger. Adrian Cole sat upright, letting the seasoned hands of a makeup specialist work with meticulous care. The sharp smell of glue from the false beard lingered in the air. Coarse strands of hair were pressed firmly to his chin, hiding familiar lines. Silver streaks were carefully woven into his temples, making his face look a decade older. Steel-rimmed glasses slid down his nose, turning eyes that were once piercing into something muted and harmless. Adrian studied the reflection, watching himself become just another stranger, a man so ordinary that employees would glance past him and never remember. He exhaled slowly, a mix of relief and quiet ache. To hide his own identity in order to see the truth inside the empire he had built, that was a tragedy, but it was the only way. The artist asked casually, "Have you done this before?" Adrian answered softly, his voice already altered, deeper, raspier, so unfamiliar it startled even him. "Never, but this time it is necessary." Memories swept over him. The early days when he slept on the kitchen floor of his first store, wrapped in an old blanket. Mornings when he woke, rolled up his sleeves, washed his hands in cold water, then ground the meat, baked the bread, and poured coffee for each customer himself. He had once sworn he would never lose that feeling. Yet now, he had to wear a mask and sneak around to find what he had abandoned. When the specialist finally nodded and stepped back, Adrian slowly pulled the brim of a cap low over his brow. In the mirror, his eyes no longer belonged to founder Adrian Cole, but to an anonymous old man, someone who could sit for hours in the corner of a diner and no one would bother to ask. He rose, clutching Margaret's envelope in his jacket pocket. It pulsed like a beating heart, reminding him why he had returned. Adrian gave a slight nod, as if promising the image in the mirror. "No one will recognize me, and because of that, I will see everything." He turned and walked out, ready to step into a world that bore his name, but no longer belonged to him. The wind chime on the door rang with indifference as Adrian stepped into the branch of Cole's Grill that felt both familiar and foreign. A sluggish chill brushed across his face. Not the pleasant cool of air conditioning, but an invisible coldness, the coldness of indifference. The room was darker than he remembered. A few fluorescent lights flickered, leaving blotched patches of shadow across peeling painted walls. Empty tables were scattered, littered with crumbs as if they had not been wiped clean in days. There was no trace of the warmth of the second home he had once promised to give his customers. Behind the counter, a young woman in a wrinkled uniform glanced at him, her eyes sliding away as quickly as they had met his, returning to the glow of her phone screen. The name tag half hidden on her chest read, Shannon. No greeting, no smile, only the faint clicking sound of a touchscreen keyboard. Adrian walked slowly, his heartbeat pounding as though each step cut deeper into his own shame. He chose a table by the wall where the paint had peeled into long strips like curling paper. A young waiter shuffled over, eyes fixed on his worn notepad. "What do you want to drink?" The voice was flat and dry. "Coffee. And the house special," Adrian replied. The coffee arrived first, its surface still and lifeless, not a hint of steam rising. He left it untouched in silence. 10 minutes later, a plate was dropped onto the table. A flattened bun, pale fries, a lopsided burger slumped cold as if pulled straight from the refrigerator. Adrian pressed a fingertip to the bread. The chill pierced straight through his skin. He had not yet taken a bite when complaints rose from the next table. A middle-aged woman pressed her finger into her sandwich, frowning. "It's stone cold." Her husband tried a bite, then set it down and shook his head. The young waiter glanced at Shannon. She lounged in her chair, eyes fixed on her phone, and muttered carelessly, "Just picky customers. Ignore it." Adrian held back the waves of heat boiling in his chest. He watched as the couple quietly abandoned their meal and walked out. Their footsteps were soft, but in his mind they thundered like the slam of a massive door. Another customer turning away from the promise he once made. He looked down at his own burger. The patty was pale, carrying the sharp, chemical scent of frozen meat. He did not need to taste it to know this was a blatant betrayal of every vow he had once sworn. In that moment, he realized the place that had once been the beating heart of the brand was now as cold as the food on his plate. And if this was the flagship branch, the one closest to the soul of the brand, then what awaited in the far-flung locations? Adrian lifted his head slowly, fire burning in his eyes behind the steel-rimmed glasses. The truth had begun to surface, but this was only the outer shell. He had to go deeper, into the kitchen itself, where the heart that once pulsed with life may already have rotted away. The kitchen door creaked open, the hinge screeching like a warning. Adrian stepped inside. The stench of old grease hit his face, sharp and rancid, leaving a bitter sting in his throat. It was not the smell of a hurried meal, but the residue of months, even years, of neglect. The tiled floor clung sticky beneath his shoes, every step dragging as if the ground resisted him. In the corner, a tower of dirty plates leaned dangerously, edges hardened with dried streaks of brownish-red sauce. Instead of being washed, someone had shoved them under the shelves, hidden away as though burying trash could make it disappear. Shouting erupted in the stifling heat of the kitchen. A woman's voice, sharp and cutting, the shift leader, pointed at a plate just returned from the dining room. "Do you smell this? The customer gagged on the very first bite. This is rotten meat, clearly from your station." The burly cook snapped back, throwing a pan onto the stove with a metallic clang. "Don't pin it all on me. You're the one who makes the final check. If spoiled food hits the table, that's on you." The other staff remained silent, a dish boy with his head bowed, ears burning red, and an assistant cook hiding behind headphones pretending to see nothing. No one dared step in, no one willing to take responsibility. Adrian stood at the edge of the kitchen, breathing in the scene. It was not just the smell of decay, it was the rot of spirit. In the old days, even a slightly undercooked burger was enough to rally the entire team to fix it. But now, only blame and concealment remained. Suddenly, the dish boy dropped his rag, pulled off his apron, and walked straight out the back door. No one called after him. Not a word to stop him. The door slammed shut, and the argument carried on, filling the space he had left behind. Adrian felt it with brutal clarity. This was no longer merely a chaotic kitchen. It was a mirror of a culture already dead. A culture where responsibility was a burden and shirking it had become the way to survive. He drew in a long breath, not to steady himself, but to swallow the fury burning in his chest. It was not only the food that was rotting. The spirit of the place was decaying as well. Adrian knew he had stepped into a nest of termites. If he did not rip it out at the root, it would only be a matter of time before the entire house bearing his name collapsed. The first sound Adrian heard as he stepped deeper into the kitchen was not conversation, but the heavy thud of a frozen slab of meat hitting the blazing grill. Steam rose, the stench of cold flesh mixing with the acrid smoke of burning oil. He froze in place, his whole body drawn tight like a wire. In the center of the kitchen stood the head chef, a broad man with massive shoulders, a towel draped carelessly around his neck. Tony. He pressed the frozen patty hard against the grill with a metal spatula, the shrill hiss filling the air as shards of white frost dissolved into vapor. From the serving counter, a voice called out, "Table 12 wants their burger medium rare." Tony let out a harsh laugh, his tone dripping with disdain. "Medium rare? With this stuff, it's all the same. Who cares?" He pressed the meat harder, steam rising with the foul metallic odor that betrayed months-old frozen stock. Adrian watched, his eyes darkening, the hand in his pocket clenched so tight it went numb. Another call came, this time from a young girl at the counter. "Daddy, I want a milkshake." Adrian tilted his head, catching sight through the doorway of a young father smiling, brushing his daughter's hair back, nodding to the server. The little girl's eyes shone with the innocent light only a child carries. Tony overheard and rolled his eyes. "Tell her the machine's broken," he barked. The server hesitated. "But the machine is still working, Tony." Tony didn't answer. He turned, grabbed a metal cup, scooped in ice cream and slid it into the mixer. The engine roared. He waited, smirking, then poured the thick milkshake into a plastic cup. But instead of sending it out, he raised it to his lips and drank deep, sighing with satisfaction. "There," he sneered, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "Milkshakes are only for those who deserve them." Outside, the father patted his daughter gently on the shoulder. "It's okay. Maybe next time the machine will be fixed." The girl's face faltered, her smile extinguished like a candle snuffed out by the wind. Adrian's grip tightened on the vegetable knife before him, the blade glinting under the kitchen lights. In his mind echoed the vow he had made long ago. "If the day comes when we deceive our customers, I will close these doors myself." Yet now he was forced to witness deceit that had become routine, cruelty that had become instinct. And Tony, the man who claimed the right to decide who was served and who was denied, had become the embodiment of the disease eating away at the empire. Adrian drew in a sharp breath, restraining himself from tearing off the disguise and exposing the man on the spot. He knew it was not yet time. He needed to see it all, to gather proof, to uncover the full truth, so that when the moment came, there would be no room left for denial. But behind the lenses of his false glasses, His eyes blazed, a fire burning hotter than the flames beneath the grill. The kitchen door swung open and the atmosphere changed instantly. A man stepped in, draped in a perfectly tailored dark blue suit, tie neatly knotted, a watch glinting under the fluorescent light. The noise in the kitchen dropped as if someone had turned down the volume. Mark Harlan, regional manager, the man whose signature sealed every report sent to headquarters. He did not need to shout, did not need to bark orders. His presence alone was enough to make every employee stiffen their backs, their movements suddenly rigid, not out of pride, but out of the nervous obedience of those afraid of misplaced power. Mark kept the phone pressed to his ear, his voice smooth and steady, like he was selling a dream. "Yes, I just checked. Everything is perfect. Staff are stable. Food quality assured. This week's report will be spotless, don't worry." Adrian stood by the sink, pretending to chop vegetables, but every word pierced his chest like a needle. This was not ignorance. This was deliberate concealment. When Mark ended the call, he glanced around the kitchen and offered a polite, shallow smile. "Smells great in here." Tony immediately flashed a sycophantic grin, clapping Mark hard on the shoulder. "Always does, boss. This kitchen runs smooth as ever." Adrian's grip on the knife tightened until his knuckles went white. Smooth. He could still smell the rancid meat, still see the dirty dishes shoved under the shelves, still hear the little girl outside choking back tears after being deceived. Mark did not look closer, nor did he ask a single question. His eyes skimmed the room as if everything here was just furniture, so long as the paperwork remained pristine. One nod, a quick, "Good job, keep it up," and he turned away, leaving without meeting anyone's eyes again. But in the instant the door closed behind him, Adrian saw it clearly. Both Tony and Shannon let out a sigh of relief, their shoulders sagging, their expressions slipping back to their usual state. It had all been nothing more than a short performance to keep their positions safe. And Mark was the director. Adrian lowered his gaze to the cutting board, the knife blade flashing. He had found the missing piece. Rotten food was just a symptom. Indifference was the consequence. The true disease was a system built to protect lies. He swallowed the fury rising in his throat, whispering silently to himself, "If I am to cut this out at the root, I must expose those who polish over the rot." The sizzle of oil filled the kitchen again, but in Adrian's mind, a plan was already beginning to take shape. The clamor of the kitchen still murmured behind him, but Adrian had already left it. He walked into a narrow hallway, the yellowed light casting shadows on peeling walls. The smell of grease and stale meat clung to every corner, and then his eyes stopped. Above him, half hidden behind a dangling electrical wire, a slogan board hung crooked. The bold letters that once carried pride were now smothered in dust. "The customer is our #1 priority." Adrian halted, staring upward for a long moment. The glass surface was smeared with greasy stains. The once white background had yellowed, and the corners were blotched with mildew. That promise hanging there no longer commanded respect. It looked like a cheap joke. For an instant, he saw himself 15 years ago, a screwdriver in his hand as he hung the very first sign in the grand opening of his restaurant. He had straightened every corner with care, believing those words were an unspoken law for everyone. Every employee would have to look up and see it. Every customer would feel it the moment they walked in. And yet now, what had once been pride had become a monument to neglect. Adrian swallowed hard, the feeling as if the whole room was mocking him. Each layer of dust on that glass seemed to whisper, "This is the legacy you left behind. This is what you allowed to happen." He closed his eyes, his breathing heavy. Wiping dust off a sign would not fix this. He would have to tear apart the foundation itself, expose the truth that had been buried. Adrian turned sharply, striding toward the exit. In his coat pocket, Margaret's letter seemed to burn hot against his chest, urging him on. He had seen enough. Frozen meat, cold service, dishonest management, and a slogan turned into a farce. Now he needed proof. Not to archive it, but to slam it into the faces of those who had disgraced the brand. He whispered, his voice slicing the air like a blade. "You think the truth can be buried under dust? I will tear it out, and when the light hits it, no one will escape." In the flickering shadows of the hallway bulb, Adrian walked away. From that moment on, he was no longer just an anonymous old man. He was a hunter of truth, preparing to strike the decisive blow. Night settled over the city. In the dim glow of a cheap motel room, Adrian Cole sat before a scarred wooden table. On the surface lay an old travel bag, unzipped and gaping open, stuffed with fragments of the truth he had gathered. He laid out each photograph, his hand trembling but his eyes razor-sharp. A picture of frozen patties stacked beside the grill. A photo of the milkshake machine gleaming yet marked with a sign that read, "Broken." A shot of half-eaten meals abandoned cold on customer tables. Each image fell like a knife into the legacy he once believed unshakable. Next was the small recorder. Adrian pressed play. Tony's gravelly voice spilled out, careless and mocking. "Medium rare? It's all the same, who cares?" The hiss of a frozen patty on the grill followed, punctuated by a contemptuous laugh. He skipped forward. Shannon's flat voice came next, the faint tapping of her phone in the background. "Just picky customers. Ignore it." Finally, the smooth, polished, deceitful tone of Mark. "I just checked. Everything's fine. The report will look clean. Don't worry." Adrian closed his eyes, his chest tightening, not from shock, but from confirmation. Every suspicion had now become undeniable truth. He turned to a stack of handwritten notes, hurried scrawls from employees who dared to trust him. From a young dishwasher, "I'm afraid telling the truth will cost me my job." Another page in soft, looping script. "They're skimming the tips." And a final scrap of paper, short and cutting. "Rotten meat. I can't stand the smell." Adrian arranged everything into a line. The photos, the recording, the testimonies. Before him lay not a dossier, but a graveyard of faith, where each piece of evidence was a headstone marking the death of honesty. He leaned against the table, his head bowed. What he felt was not triumph, but the sorrow of a father discovering his child had gone astray. Yet within that sorrow, a quiet strength rose. There was no room left for hesitation, no path left for retreat. Adrian gripped the file tight, his eyes burning with resolve. He now had everything needed to expose them, and he knew exactly where it had to be done. At the grand upcoming anniversary celebration, before the entire board, the staff, and the honored guests. In the silence of the room, he spoke softly, as if vowing to the darkness itself, "You have built a castle of lies. I will be the one to bring it crashing down, and when the light shines on it, every face will be revealed." The fire in his chest flared strong. Margaret's letter in his pocket burned hot, as if urging him forward. Adrian was no longer merely a hunter of truth. He was the judgment itself. The crystal chandeliers blazed, casting golden light across the grand hall. On the towering backdrop hung the proud words, "20 years of glory, Cole's Grill." The clinking of champagne glasses and the swell of polite laughter rippled like waves. Directors, investors, and honored guests sat in neat rows, faces gleaming with satisfaction. On stage, Tony stood in a crisp suit, his voice rehearsed and smooth. We have always taken pride in our quality, in our dedication. Every meal, every moment is perfection. Applause thundered. Shannon stepped forward, her polished smile fixed. And all of this is thanks to our devoted team, who always put the customer first. Again, applause rolled through the hall. In the front row, Mark leaned back, legs crossed, lifting his glass with a smug grin tugging at his lips. In the shadows at the edge of the room, Adrian stood silently. His old coat carried the dust of the road, steel-rimmed glasses catching the dim light. He felt the pounding of his heart against his ribs. In his pocket, the USB drive, heavy with evidence, weighed on him like lead. The moment had come. Behind Tony, the screen flickered to life. At first, glossy images played, gleaming kitchens, smiling staff, happy customers. Music swelled. But then, the footage jolted. Grainy, shaky video appeared. Tony pressing a frozen patty into the grill, sneering, "Medium rare? It's all the same. Who cares?" The hall fell into dead silence. A cough broke from the corner. The screen jumped again. Shannon appeared behind the counter, eyes glued to her phone, dismissing a customer's complaint with a flick of her head. "Just picky. Ignore them." Murmurs rose. Some investors leaned forward, brows furrowed. Another cut. Mark, in his dark blue suit, speaking into his phone. "Everything is perfect. This week's report will be spotless. Don't worry." The hall shook with outrage. Glasses clattered onto tables. On stage, Tony's face drained of color. Shannon froze, her smile collapsing. Mark's hand trembled around his glass, wine quivering. Then, through the heavy silence, a voice cut deep and sharp as steel. "Enough." All eyes turned toward the figure stepping from the shadows. Adrian Cole removed his glasses, lifted off his cap. The room jolted as if struck by lightning. He raised his head, his voice low and resonant, each word crashing like a hammer. "I am Adrian Cole, the man who built Cole's Grill with these hands. And I made a promise, fresh meat every day, respect in every meal. But you." He thrust his finger toward the stage, eyes burning like forged steel. "Tony, you served customers rotten food. You stole a milkshake from a child to keep for yourself. You are fired. Right now." Tony opened his mouth, but no words came. Whispers surged, rising into uproar. "Shannon, you turned apathy into culture. You abandoned customers and staff alike. You are finished here as well." Shannon's face twisted, lips trembling. "And Mark." Adrian's voice dropped, each word slicing the silence. "You did not fix the rot. You built walls to hide it. You filed false reports, dusted lies over the truth. You are the greatest traitor. You are done." The air exploded. The hall erupted into chaos. Chairs scraping, voices clashing, cameras flashing. Adrian strode onto the stage, his gaze sweeping across the crowd. His tone deepened, steady and resonant, like the roll of a great drum. "And to all of you, the staff, the customers, the people who still believe in this name, I am sorry. I was gone too long. I let the promise be betrayed. But from today, we begin again, not with words, but with action." The hall fell silent, not a breath. Then, from the rows of employees, a voice rose, small but clear. "I will stay." Another followed. Then more, until a chorus filled the hall, strong and unified. "We will stay." Adrian nodded, his eyes ablaze. He gripped the microphone tight, declaring, "Then let us begin again right now." The light shone on his face, not that of a broken man, but of one who had taken back his legacy from the hands of darkness. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the windows, filling Cole's grill with a renewed glow. The stench of old grease was gone, replaced by the warm aroma of freshly baked bread and the rich scent of coffee. Adrian stood in the center of the kitchen, sleeves rolled up on his white shirt, like the cook he once was, back exactly where it all began. "Don't rush," he reminded them, his voice low but firm, eyes carefully following every movement of his team. "A good piece of meat needs time, the outside crisp, the inside still full of juice. Respect the ingredients, and they will give back everything." Harper, the young waitress whose dedication he had noticed before, nodded, committing every word to memory. Nearby, the dishwasher boy who once wrote the trembling note, "I'm afraid of losing my job," was now learning how to plate a burger. His hands still shook, but his eyes shone with trust and determination. In the kitchen, no one looked at a phone. No one hid from responsibility. They called out timing cues for each dish, moving together like an orchestra finally reunited after a long silence. Every careful, every ready, echoed like the steady beat of a drum keeping them in rhythm. Out in the dining room, the wooden tables gleamed with polish. The chairs no longer wobbled but stood firm. An elderly couple stepped in, their eyes cautious, searching for something they had long lost. Adrian welcomed them at the door, his smile genuine, unforced. "Welcome back," he said slowly, warmly. They were seated by the window. When their food arrived, 2 steaming burgers, golden buns, fresh meat glistening with juice, they hesitated, then took a bite. The husband paused, turning to his wife. A small smile spread across her face, her eyes lighting up as if a long-buried memory had suddenly returned. From the corner of the restaurant, Adrian watched, breathing deeply. He knew this was the real victory, not the applause of the anniversary celebration. Then the door opened softly. A small figure in a pale blue coat stepped inside, her hands trembling slightly with age. Margaret Ellis, the woman who had written the letter that changed everything. Adrian set down his towel and walked to greet her. She looked up at him, her eyes searching, as if recognizing something familiar in the face he had tried so hard to disguise. "Burger," she said quietly, her voice hoarse but steady. "Like it used to be." Adrian nodded, his eyes glistening. "Like it used to be." And when she took her first bite, her eyes closed, and a peaceful smile spread across her face. No words of thanks were needed, no explanations. Just a gentle nod was enough. Adrian stood still, his chest swelling with emotion. He knew the journey of rebirth had begun, and this time he would never again allow the promise to be betrayed. Night had fallen. The noise of the evening shift had faded, leaving only the soft hum of small sounds, the clinking of dishes, the trickle of water in the sink. In the kitchen, now bright and spotless, Adrian stood at the basin, his white shirt damp at the elbows, his weathered hands scrubbing a plate until it shone. Beside him, Harper bent over the sink, strands of hair loose around her face, a smear of flour still clinging to her cheek. They did not need many words, only the sound of water, the scrape of brushes, and the steady rhythm of their breaths created a simple harmony. Suddenly their hands brushed against each other on the slick edge of a plate. The moment paused. Young fingers, trembling from inexperience, touched the hand that had once built an empire. Both looked up, their eyes meeting. In Harper's gaze, there was no longer the weariness that once lingered, but the light of trust, rekindled. Adrian gave a small nod. Harper answered with a faint, tired but genuine smile. Above the sink, the slogan board hung quietly. The dust and yellow stains were gone. The bold words, "The customer is our #1 priority," gleamed once more, reflecting the kitchen light. In the clear glass, Adrian saw their reflections, himself and Harper, standing side by side, their hands working together, rebuilding the promise. He lifted his eyes to the sign, holding the gaze. It was no longer an empty slogan. It was once again a vow. Harper placed the last plate on the rack and turned off the faucet. A quiet warmth settled over the room. They stood side by side, saying nothing, but both understood. From this moment, the brand would not just return, it would endure, sustained by those who still believed, who still kept the flame alive. Adrian closed his eyes, his heart whispering, "A legacy is not in numbers, but in the hands that still choose to protect it." Outside, the laughter of customers drifted in, mingling with the aroma of fresh bread. In the kitchen, the lights reflected two figures, one older, one younger, moving in unison, like two heartbeats joined in the same faith. And Adrian knew this time it would last. The restaurant was quiet after the evening shift. The tables had been set neatly, the polished wood reflecting the soft glow of golden lights. Adrian stood alone at the service counter, his hands resting gently on the clean surface. There was no longer the hiss of burning grease, no lingering damp smell, only the faint trace of soap and the warm echo of a place brought back to life. He looked around and noticed the small details he had once overlooked. A folded cloth left on a chair, a glass turned upside down and dry, the weary but genuine smile of an employee finishing their shift. Everything seemed to whisper that the soul had returned. Adrian spoke softly, his voice deep and steady, as if reminding not only the staff but himself as well. There are standards that cannot be bargained. Kindness and honesty, either you keep them or you lose everything. In his mind appeared the faces. Margaret with her smile as she bit into a hot burger, Harper with her eyes shining though her shoulders were tired, the young dishwasher who once trembled but now stood with confidence at the grill. And he saw the younger version of himself, the man who used to stay after closing time, carefully polishing every spoon. He smiled faintly, giving a quiet nod. Legacy was not the grand buildings or the revenue numbers, but the way one keeps a promise to those who place their trust. Beyond the window, night stretched wide, silver moonlight bathing the empty street. Adrian turned, stepping out, his figure fading into the pale glow. Yet inside the restaurant, trust and the old familiar flavor remained, more alive than ever. In business, many believe success comes from profit or opening more branches. But the deeper truth is this: a brand only truly exists when it holds on to trust. Not the kind of trust written in reports, but the kind seasoned into every dish, carried through every small action. When that trust is broken, every number becomes meaningless. But when it is restored, an entire legacy can come back to life. That is the lesson from this journey. A leader cannot simply sit in a boardroom. They must have the courage to step onto the floor, touch the work with their own hands, and face the truth, no matter how harsh that truth may be. If you believe that kindness and honesty are the strongest foundations for building anything that lasts, then hit like and subscribe so you do not miss more inspiring stories like this. And before you go, leave a short comment Just 2 words. Keep promise.